Muito bem.
Well, now we're going to talk about cybersecurity, and for some of them, the innovative responses in terms of cybersecurity have not been the best. That is, they have not had the results expected, and so we are on the threshold of a new legislation. Is it going to be more effective? Is it going to be tighter? Is it going to solve the problems that many of the companies who are here feel every day? So this is what we're going to try and understand in a while with the with my guest. And so perhaps I can start with the keynote speaker, who's Inês Antes de Barros, who's a partner of Communication and Technology, Vieira de Almeida.
Muito bom dia a todos. Muito obrigada pelo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, and congratulations to APDC for its 40th anniversary. I would like to give you a brief review about the new directive, NIS2. How did it emerge? It emerged at the end of the year 2000, after the pandemic, where in fact there was a great increase of events, and Europe realized that the legislation that exists up to now did not offer the most appropriate measures to tackle these incidents. And this in December 2020, there was a European strategy for cybersecurity, which aimed at increasing the resilience of companies and sharing information so that they could meet and to provide these companies with the ability to respond more effectively to these incidents, a greater number, greater scale, with a greater impact on the organisation. So with this European strategy, we have different initiatives. We're going to just look at NIS2, but I would just like to say that it doesn't exist on its own. There are additional legislation, that is the protection of infrastructures and the insurance aspects, and with the Digital Operation Security Act and with Cyber Security Act, which would intend to create a legal framework that can meet the current challenges in terms of cybersecurity. And so what are the main alterations of the directive to NIS2? Well, NIS2 has to be transposed to the national legal framework until October this year. And so we are right at the very end of its implementation. So on the other hand, there's an extension of the sectors covered NIS1, but still would cover a number of sectors which are considered essential sectors of the economy, and these were the companies that developed the activities in this sector, which had an additional number of obligations. And this array is going to be extended. And then we have the elimination of the distinction between digital service operators and essential service operators. And so this distinction is clearer, the legal framework is clearer now in terms of organizations. And so we have essential operators, and we're going to see what is the impact at the end of the day. And so there are more requirements, safety requirements. Legislation does not have a detailed subset of security measures. I mean, because they can be adequate today and not tomorrow. And so we have a number of minimum requirements organizations have to implement. There's a greater focus of the legislator in the supply chain. We understood that quite often the incidents were not within the organization, but in the supply chain, and it's for suppliers who were a considerable risk for the organizations. And then, at the end, like just all the normal legal act, there was a reinforcement of the supervision mechanism, and so with higher fines and has more substantial fines in comparison with the previous directive. Now let's very quickly look at 3 points. In terms of application, I said there was an increase of the entities covered, and here we can see in green the entities or the sectors that are going to be covered, which were not covered before by NIS1. And another important aspect within the scope of the application, contrary to what actually happened in the NIS1 directive, where we had to wait for notification from the national cybersecurity organization to know whether this operator was operational or not. And now it's automatic. And so if you work in one of these sectors, I'm now automatically covered by this directive NIS2. And so we have essential service operators and entities, or rather the major difference is in supervisory powers, as we're going to see. And since from the health sector, energy, wastewater, space, all the sectors that were not covered by NIS1 and are now covered, because we understood that these are sectors that were structural in terms of activity and economy. And now another of the fundamental points of the NIS2 directive is that it requires that the organizations have a proactive and not reactive attitudes. That quite often the cybersecurity systems are coming to the agenda of the organizations in the reactive way, rather. And so NIS2 requires a proactive attitude in terms of the risk in the prevention and detection and response to incidents, very demanding obligations in terms of the notification of incidents with 4 moments of notification of incidents, which means that the management procedures are enhanced. And so the implementation of this resilience framework, and so as I already mentioned, this idea of the supply chain security, not only at the time of the choice of my supplier, but in the monitoring and the monitoring that the organizations will have to carry out vis-a-vis their suppliers. And so this is to make administration accountable. The administrative body is responsible for deploying, for implementing this risk framework and to ensure that it's implemented within the organization. And this is a major difference in relation to the previous directive. Another point in relation to the supply chain, as I mentioned, this was one of the major concerns of the legislators. It was understood that many of the industries emerged in the supply chain and the impact that this can have for the organization's activities. So there is a specific duty with regards to the evaluation of the supplier and the guarantee that this supplier is going to give to the organization in relation to his resilience, and this aspect is reinforced in NIS2. And so to oversee the sanctions, we have powers of the authorities and the supervisory bodies, which are enhanced, and they can have a proactive logic of carrying out assessments. But for example, when something's been reported or there's been a complaint, and so everything has to be reinforced. The consequence is there's a substantial increase of the fines that can be applied, and it can be 2% of the overall turnover. And there's an increase in the sanctions. So if we looked at the impact, how it can be managed to tackle all this, because not only NIS2 is just one little part of the puzzle, and anticipation, capacitation, and implementation. And the technology can give a great help in the implementation in cyber risks, and so we have to improve capacity building of people, and so thank you. We have to look at the deadlines, of course.
Obrigado, Inês.
Thank you very much, Inês. So, would you please come down with us? So to talk about cybersecurity with two women tells a little bit about the evolution of our society. And so Inês, we've seen the legal part. And I'd like to begin with Jessica Demese, who is responsible for the cybersecurity in the Department of Health. And there have been a number of incidents and suffered with this. Are the laws, as Inês was saying, anticipating? Are they being reactive? The laws are helping. Are really helping, and quite often the entities should have already fulfilled the good practice, but the regulatory is forcing is making them to do this. This is the case of NIS1, that is in the sector of health, as the nation mentioned. That is already, but it wasn't sufficient just in terms of hospitals, and now. And we can see that this is a great advantage, because many of the incidents do not come from the organizations, but from their suppliers. And with NIS2, it'll be obligatory. So what is missing in terms of security and occur quite often? So what is really missing? That is the worker, the way they use a professional email. Is this sort of open door for crime? Quite often organizations were implementing their controls from a professional point of view, from an organizational point of view, and we were working outside house, but there was the need for other prevention methods. And I don't know whether the collaborators are working from a non-secure network in order to have access to their professional email. But in this sense, it is we have to control the additional protection, but to the collaborator, the employer, citizen must be aware that their activities will have a direct impact or indirect impact on the organization. Are people aware of this? Do you have a difficulty in health management? It has to be trained people have to be trained every day. It's never awareness raising programs are never too many. I mean, we have to make sure we have to be attentive in terms of security. It's not the cybersecurity department is the only one responsible. It's the user in his everyday life who are use them and not personal ones to carry out different types of activities at WhatsApp, for example. Most of the organizations have platforms, cooperative platforms, in order for people to talk among them. But quite often, what we end up by seeing is that the people choose not to use them, and they use other types of platforms which are in no way controlled, and which emits impacts, and so they have to be made aware of this every day. In each, can the law do something or not, or is this a grey zone which is sort of left outside the law? So this topic of capacity building is very important. Cybersecurity is fundamental. The companies, and I would say those companies can and should adopt, because they have a law to fulfill, a set of measures. But if people cannot understand what they can do and cannot do, then we have a problem. But obviously there are ways of controlling the use that the user or workers do. And so this raises other questions, that privacy in the workplace. And so the balances in terms of practice is very difficult rather. And so do we need NIS2 is very important. Why didn't it work? Because it was just a test to understand how far they could go. Because the European Union is accused of being castrating, and the Americans were liberal on this question. I think NIS1 was a test, and NIS2 is the second test. I mean, there's no perfect law. So if you look at other sectors, the sectors of insurance and finances, which going to have legislation which is even more demanding than NIS2, then I would say that this is a test for the European Union to enhance things to more. And so we have to bring cybersecurity into the administration, we have to bring it into our jobs, and deep down we have to go into the DNA of the organization. So it is it's easier and easier to understand. And so this new law is not going to help change these behaviors, or the idea that they can't, they should. It's not this way, it's that way, and maybe not be the most efficient way. One is the law, and the other thing is the efficiency of the law. It's going to help, because many of the entities realize they have to fulfill these requirements, but the sanctions are going to be higher than the previous regime established. So most of the hospitals and the health sector were included, and we see NIS2 is very welcome, because we know what is expected from organizations now. We, within the scope of the legal regime, that's the transposition of NIS1, it gave the responsibility to an entity to make a risk analysis to define the security requirements to implement. In this case, obviously there's a need for a risk analysis to define exactly what measures and controls have to be implemented, but they can define the exact topics that they obligatorily have to comply with. And so it's like a recipe, if you like. It's a sort of prescription that has to be of items that have to be prescribed. What I've seen in organizations, they're always waiting for this list, basically. So it's very difficult to make a risk analysis, then you implement the controls. And in this case, this is going to help these measures. And the notification of incidents is critical as well. And so the earlier we know that the incident is happening and it could have impacts on other institutions, then other organizations can prepare themselves. So have you been an example whenever there's an incident in health that's got much more impact than other sectors? So up to what extent are you an example, and people trying to ask you what you have done to do this, and so as not to jeopardize the whole hospital? So you have the events from different hospitals. unfortunately, some have some impact. And that's what we're trying to reduce. Cybersecurity is what we try to reduce, is the impact of incidents. Incidents are always going to happen. And so from the time that we are in the digital world, incidents are going to happen. What we have to reduce is the impact that these events, these incidents are actually going to have in an organization. And so what we have been doing is has been training its teams and preparing it not for only for the same press, but because it needs to already foresee the creation of teams, task forces, and now is training not for responsiveness, but it's more the monitoring of it and of anomalies, vulnerabilities, and events that actually happen, so that as quickly as possible, as early as possible, we can implement measures, and then there will be no impacts like the one that unfortunately we've already seen. Just this team, you were sort of saying, well, this task force that we're talking about, so whether it works and is good results in health, it could have it in other companies that are here present. So what would a company, like in addition to the law that it wants to fight cybercrime, what can it do to create a team? How is it made? Well, I mean, how does it, is it active, preventive, or reactive? It's both. That is, these, there are the security operation centers which are more proactive of monitoring. As I can say that most of the entities, there is a study from the Commission that says it refers that the companies that are NIS2 will need to increase 22% of the budget of the cybersecurity and technology. And so that is in the first years of implementation of the directive.
So what have these teams done made the difference? How have they made the difference? They have to understand what exists in organizations. Quite often, organizations don't know what they generate in-house and externalize. If they externalize and there's a responsibility of their value chain, and there's a forcing so that they can correct vulnerabilities in case of identifying incidents that are reported, and safety aspects that are collected and that are detected and flagged. Ines, to conclude, and based on your experience, you know that there's the law and its effectiveness. How are you complying with? We have no cybersecurity police who will conduct the surveillance, and if sanctions will be significant. We don't know how the directive will be implemented. It strengthens the directive's power. So in the enhancement, surveillance, internal capacity building to enforce the law, you need people working on it. And we know that this is being done. There will be an effective enforcement and a bit more pedagogical, which will be the regulars approach when there's a deeper change. First of all, more pedagogical, and then a more effective enforcement of the law. Thank you very much, ladies, and good morning.